Oh, hey John, and welcome. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you. I've had my third day of proper coffee, so I'm pretty happy about that, Kyra.
Nice work, buzzing. Well, welcome to those of you watching us here in what is called the Soda Community Catch-Up Series. I'm Kyra, the Soda Comms and Events Coordinator, and one of my main focuses is the NZ Startup Bootcamp, which a lot of you will know has had to be postponed. But before that, we had John Wilkinson, ASB Bank Commercial Manager for the Waikato and Bay of Plenty, lined up to be one of our key mentors. ASB is a massive supporter of Soda and will still be sponsoring the event when we can eventually run it. John is passionate about helping startups, shown through his championing of Soda Inc. by being the catalyst to ensure continuing support from ASB Bank. John is an experienced commercial banker with too many years of experience to claim, but as a result, he has lots of wisdom to share. John is also a director on our board and has previously been part of our Dragon's Den panel. It's so nice to have you here, John. To kick us off, I wondered if you could tell me what are the key pieces of advice you are giving commercial banking clients right now?
Well, Kyra, the key bits of advice I'm giving my clients right now is to just be really comfortable or try and get comfort from where they're at themselves. I think there's I suppose it's like anything, look after, make sure they're in a good frame of mind themselves, and then look outside themselves and look after their family and their bubble, which is obviously may have expanded a little bit recently, and then look to maybe their team if they've got staff around them, and then expand to their clients and their suppliers, just to build those relationships. And I think in this time, those relationships are key, because it's obviously going to help clients in terms of managing things like cash flows and contracts and things like that. So, but it's really being keeping themselves safe and well, both mentally and physically first, and then obviously then building that out for others that are around them.
Awesome. Thank you. Are you already seeing innovation in banking and fintech sector due to COVID-19?
I don't know whether it's actually innovation, but we are speeding up of adoption of some options that have been around for quite a while. And I think that probably the immediate one that's come to light this week is contactless payments. I know our merchant team have been flat out with people who are wanting to take that up, where previously that had been a little bit hadn't been adopted by everyone, but I think because of the requirements around no contact for those that are doing click and collect, things like that, the contactless but it's been massive. From a point of view when we're dealing with clients who are still requiring loan documents to be signed or still requiring to settle, the use of things like sort of DocuSign, which is an electronic signing mechanism, has been taken up again, just to try and so things can be done online. And obviously, like everyone else, we've been using a lot of video messaging, whether it be Zoom or Teams or even Messenger or things like that. So, and getting used to that whole remote working and how that can look from a personal point of view. But certainly, I think it's certainly made a lot of more people aware of what their IT capabilities are within their businesses, and that includes ours. We're lucky enough that the majority of our people are working from home. The only ones that are in the office, like myself and a couple of others. Just from a technical point of view, we need to be here, but physically, we don't necessarily need to be. So we're lucky we work from an organisation that can support working from home and remotely really well.
Yeah, no, that's really good. It's always good to have that option too. I think a lot of businesses have realised that it is actually an option since this has happened. So it's cool to see it be set up properly and all of that kind of stuff. So awesome. So we know everyone is being affected by COVID-19 in varying ways. Do you have any insight into what sectors are seeing greater opportunities and which are having to totally start again?
Well, I think those that are seeing great opportunities are those who are, and if we look at firstly in the essential services areas like supermarkets, for example, their whole click and collect. I know in Hamilton, Countdown have recently opened a brand new store which is solely for click and collect. And I know there's also one opening in Auckland, which is really around solely for delivery. So I think those organisations that have been able to do that, and we've seen this week with a lot of those in the hospitality sector trying to be innovative in terms of actually returning to getting some turnover in the click and collect type thing. So a lot of people who didn't maybe already have that capability have certainly developed that, and that'll be a thing that I think will continue. And things like a bit of competition around people like Uber Eats to say, can we disrupt that market a little bit because of more demand in that space now? I think those that have really been challenged are obviously the obvious ones that were robbed because of the borders, which is tourism. Anyone involved in events management, given the numbers, and obviously hospitality too. It's fine for a sector being able to do click and collect type things with cafes or maybe smaller restaurants, but some of the bigger, those that are involved in big bars or and sort of tied into events, haven't been able to do that because it just doesn't work to open a large premise. So they've been really affected, and we'll just have to wait and see how that works. But if I look at tourism, for example, the spin-off in that area has been like rental cars, for example. Apparently if you want to buy a late model car, there might be a few coming onto the market shortly around that. For events, you think about weddings, for example, the whole area that's around that with photographers, marquee people who hire marquees, even to the point where there's smaller businesses involved with close contact, like maybe makeup, hairdressers. Not that I go and see a hairdresser very often, but those type of people who are involved in that are still going to be and will still be seriously affected under level 2. So I think it's people trying to understand how that's affecting them and how they might need to pivot or think about how they can deliver these services. Some of them are quite obvious from a retail point of view, where you can just have an online catalogue and people can go and order what they want. But I think some of them where it's more personal, whether it be perhaps clothing or high-end clothing, or some of those more personal type services are going to be difficult to go. But certainly the three major ones I see is the tourism, events and the hospitality one. And to a lesser extent retail, depending on what sort of retail outlet you're in, to actually be able to manage that.
Yeah. And can I ask, what is ASB doing to help their customers to ensure their businesses can survive at that time? And some of those businesses are probably the ones you've just spoken about.
Well, there's a number of avenues, and this is, and all banks are offering a range of services to actually support it. And one is just being there and giving advice. I think is important to say you've got a lot of small business people who've got someone to talk to. But those options are pretty immediately around some cash flow assistance, which can include obviously some overdrafts, and we've been trying to be flexible as possible around that, not only the terms but also the rates that people are having to pay for those facilities. Things like principal relief, putting loans on interest only, or in cases where there is no income or no cash flow, even mortgage holidays, although that's something which we do see as a last resort, because that is capitalising interest, which is tricky and increases people's debt situation, but certainly aware of people's personal circumstances or individual circumstances around cash flow. And obviously we've recently negotiated with the government the terms around the government business finance scheme, which is available for businesses. And again, that's just really understanding individual requirements and working with clients in terms of what their own situation is to see what is the best way of financing and what type of finance they need and for how long. And sometimes that's pretty difficult in the environment because we just don't know how long they're going to be in the various levels and how they're going to be affected. But it is working very closely to do that. And that's across the board, from obviously through the clients we're dealing with in the commercial space and to our business banking, some of the smaller enterprises, and obviously in the personal sector as well.
Yeah. And do you think we really understand the implications to our way of life and economy yet? What are the ASB economists saying?
Well, I don't think we really do. I think if you've been affected personally through job loss or income reduction, or in point of how you're actually operating on a daily basis, but I think what we're seeing, our economists put out a report a couple of days ago, or 2 days ago, that talked about that they see that there's more of a V recovery. So even though we've had a massive drop off, we could see a big recovery, but they see that economic activity will still only be around 80% of normal in level 3. And we're battling headwinds around the household incomes that have been affected, and business balance sheets are going to be affected. I mean, we've had some business surveys out, business confidence is down, and obviously the situation where people are going to have to take on a little bit more debt to get through. And obviously the tourism sector is a massive one there. Will be sort of missing in action for a while, especially with the borders and a lot more focus on domestic tourism. But without being doom and gloom, they see, and based on the last GFC, they see that the impact of this is probably going to take 3 years to recover from, to get back to some normality. And I think it's just urging caution around people's business expectations and investment activity. But I think it is very much a factor that, because we don't know, there is we have to take a prudent view on what that can look like. And although we can be as positive as we want to, if the environment's not there to actually to be able to do that, it's important that we recognise those conditions. But certainly our economists, like everyone else, trying to battle through the unknowns of what it's going to look like. But I think the strong thing for New Zealand is that we do have a strong export sector, and again, been driven off the back of, I heard some numbers this morning, export of kiwi fruit gold hitting some record numbers. There's problems with the beef supply in the US, so obviously that's going to provide opportunities for our exporters. So from that point of view, I think our ability to produce high quality food products is going to be the thing that's going to pull us out and help people get through. And obviously it's important that the government still has a reasonable tax take to fund all the programs that they want to run. So I think, without being too doom and gloomy, I think we do have to be prepared to actually look at different scenarios in terms of our own businesses and the overall economy.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Thanks, John. How has this change impacted your day in the life at ASB regarding conversations and outreach you have had toward the businesses you support?
Well, obviously it's a lot of time spent in situations like this. We were on Zoom meetings or messages, and I've been trying to do a lot more face-to-face meetings rather than phone, because it's having that human contact. But a lot of time spent on the phone, a lot of time working through various scenarios with clients and saying, and again, it's going through the whole thing of, firstly, how are they doing? If I'm talking to a owner of a business or maybe talking to some directors, and then it's saying, well, how are you doing? How are your staff? Have you dealt with staff? Certainly the wage subsidy has helped retaining a lot of staff, and then just working through with their suppliers and things. But a lot of conversations, and there have been situations where we've had to be, I suppose, the person that takes the view of, have you considered that, your business may not be able to open for an extended period, what will that look like? And what discussions have you had with your staff about, reduced wages or redundancies, and have you been talking to your suppliers and your customers about what the implications are there? So it has been, I must say, and I think everyone who's working in the industry that we're in, it has been quite stressful at times, because you're dealing with people who are in very stressful situations, but we're here to support them and help them get through and to understand what their own circumstances are.
Yeah. If you were to rank the most common problems you are seeing in businesses that you support, what would they be?
Cash flow would have to be number one. I mean, that's the oxygen that keeps things moving, and that's where you've had a business where it's basically just stopped. It's how do you actually deal with that? So certainly cash flow has been the biggest one, and that's been the biggest concern of people we're talking to, is how do I keep my staff? So conversations are being around, are you aware of what support's available other than what we can provide? And that's, as I say, things like wage subsidies, other support that the staff may be available to, maybe talking to a landlord and saying, are you prepared to give us some rent relief? Talking to suppliers about negotiating different terms. talking to customers, are you going to pay me what you owe, or are you in a position where you can pay me a portion of that? So certainly cash flow would be number one.
Mm.
The next biggest challenge that we're seeing is the ability to forecast what the future might look like, because when you're not sure of if you can open and what those conditions might look like, how do you, if you're a restaurant, for example, how do you social distance people when they come in, and do you take half the tables out of your restaurant to actually enable that to happen? And how do you record everyone that came in, because the government wants you to be able to track and trace people. So the forecasting is a tricky one, and again, we're encouraging people to maybe do a number of different scenarios. But what we're also looking at, if it has been a successful business in the past, it is more likely to be a successful business in the future if we get back to normal conditions.
Mm.
So we're trying to be, again, as supportive as we can around those conditions. And I suppose the third issue is actually dealing with those relationships that I've talked about previously, that some of the staff issues have been quite challenging. I've had one instance where businesses have had to let some staff go who have been long-serving staff, but for the long-term benefit of the business, they've had to make some really hard decisions, which is, because it's happened through no fault of their own, but it's just a matter of being pragmatic about those situations. And sometimes the relationships with people like landlords have been tricky, because some landlords have been more flexible than others, but then also some tenants haven't been very flexible with some landlords. So the relationship and being aware that we're all in this together and having some collaborative approach and really what's fair and reasonable. So those were the key ones, probably cash flow, the ability to forecast, and maintaining and building collaborative relationships to help everyone get through are the important bits.
Yeah. Oh, just off that last point there, I mean, all businesses linked. When one person does not pay their bills or rent, that affects the viability and strength of another provider in the market. Have you got any examples of compromise or ways to negotiate through some of these commercial situations that you think are a win-win approach rather than a survival of the fittest or every man for himself approach?
Yeah, well, I think one of them in particular that I can think of is two examples really, Kyra. One is where it was a landlord-tenant situation, where the tenant, I'm the banker for the landlord, came to me and said, "Oh, look, I've got a note from my tenant saying that they can't pay any rent. Their cash flow stopped." And I said, "Well, my client also have outgoings. It's their sole means of income, so they can't have no income." And the business is also in a situation. So I said, "Look, the best thing you can do is to build that relationship, have a conversation. If that's not available, be pretty open in correspondence, whether an email or whatever, to say, hey, look, we understand your plight. This is our situation. What we propose is that we will give you a 50% reduction at particular levels, and we'll reduce your commitment on operating expenses by half." So that was the arrangement they came to, and that's going to be subject to review at each level, depending on the ability of the business to produce some cash. So that was a really good situation. I had another situation where we had a business who had taken a large number of deposits for future benefit of their clients. That benefit was going to be delayed for a lot longer. So a lot of proactiveness from my client's point of view to go to those clients and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to provide some alternatives of service rather than being the thing that, the way they normally provided their service through a different means. Are you happy with that? They weren't legally required to give any of those deposits back because of the situation, but they were in a position where they could negotiate and have a really good positive discussion with their customers and bring them with the journey. Some of the clients did, I think they retained something like 80% of their thing that they had. And that's really, again, why I emphasise so much around the relationship piece, to actually pick up a phone, have a conversation, because I think the government and the leaders of New Zealand have said, hey, look, we're all in this together, and we all have to share a bit of a burden in terms of what we get through. So those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, awesome. When we look back on this time in 5 years, what will be the silver lining and the learnings that will make New Zealand businesses better equipped or more resilient to adapt and deal with future challenges?
Well, I think if we could look back and say, this was going to happen, no one would have predicted it. So I think you've got to be, when you are doing your planning, you've got to think of all instances that could happen. And even if maybe if you're doing your risk planning, or as if you're on a board or managing an organisation, saying what is the worst thing that could happen, and consider that. Mm. So I think it's going to make planning more interesting, because it's going to say, well, that could never happen. Well, it did. It's a 1 in 100 year event, but it's a bit like whether you have a flood or a fire or whatever, it could happen, and just being aware of that and having a plan around how that might look like. But I think if we look at some of the silver lining from our point of view, it is that jump in the use of technology, and giving people options about their working environment. We're seeing that more people working from home, more flexible of workspace. So I think that's something which has always been there, but not everyone has actually taken it up or seen it as a viable option. So I think that's going to be interesting. So I think the face of what the work environment will look like will have changed forever after this. And so, what is it going to have an implication around what office size might be? And, in terms of I think the importance of IT people to actually keep businesses going. We certainly have been seeing that. It's pretty important. And I think one of the things that I see, if I look at it from a personal point of view, I'm involved with the organisation that's involved with dealing with education in some of the lower decile schools. I'm seeing that technology gap being closed. I know that there's massive issues around delivery of devices into some lower decile schools or lower socioeconomic areas who don't have the ability to have a device to do learning at home. And I know the government's said they're going to have a massive number of devices, but also the ability for people to have access to the internet. So I think it has identified that there's that technology gap for those people who are supplying it. And if this is an event that's going to close that gap for everyone, so people can actively participate in the digital world where they haven't been able to do that before, I think there's a responsibility there, which is pretty cool. And I think, and I mentioned it previously, and I think one of the things that is really good, and although I'm not in the rural sector, I mean, farmers have been hammered a little bit more recently in terms of their, when they talk about their impact on environment, the things around animal welfare. But I think what we're seeing again is that our primary sector is a huge driver for our success as a country. And I think seeing some of the farmers being able to stand up and have a bit of pride where they have been beaten down a little bit has been a great silver lining. And whether it be farming or forestry or viticulture or horticulture or whatever, I think it's great that we can seem to be leading, and we can feed ourselves easily, and we can feed the rest of the world as well, and that provides some great resources for to be able to look after everyone in our country. So I think those are some of the challenges and the learnings and the silver linings.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear some positive things that are coming out of this.
I know it's pretty hard to look at it sometimes when you're dealing with people who have no income and their business is struggling, but I think there are some positive things coming out of this. And as I say, in 5 years we'll look back and say, yeah, well, it's a bit like the GFC. There was some good things came out of that 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, and I think that's some of the things that I think anyway, Kyra.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, John. Just to summarise, would you be able to give me 3 essential tips for SME business survival during this time?
Yeah, like I go back to the thing I said originally, which was make sure you're okay if you're a business person and you have a key role in the business. You've got to be comfortable that your own situation is there so you can be a positive contribution to whatever role you play. So I think it's looking after yourself, making sure you're okay. That's your health and well-being, both mentally and physically. Look after your relationships. not only your personal ones, but also your business ones, which is your, talking about your staff, your customers, your suppliers. I think that's really important. I think those are the relationships you have with those people are the things that are going to help you get through, and being upfront and being fair and reasonable in your dealings with those people. But I also think you've got to use the people around you. Being a business owner, I know from people that I deal with can be a little bit of a lonely place sometimes. So use the people around you, whether it be friends or colleagues, but also your professionals, your accountant, your lawyer, your banker. Your accountant, for example, can help you with some of the tax changes that have happened, where you can get some tax relief if you are making losses. So you don't have to pay tax if you did make a profit in the year just finished. Your lawyer can help you with issues around leases or contracts or whatever. And your banker can help you maybe ease some of those cash flow pressures that you're under. But I think fundamentally you've got to be in a great mental state so you can deal with those. So making sure that you've got those issues of your own health and well-being nailed down, Kyra.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, John. And thanks so much for checking in and catching up with me. Just hopefully we can catch up again soon, and it's face to face in person.
I really look forward to that, Kyra. Thank you very much. Okay.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye bye.